Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the little delay. We had to get some things from admin put on the agenda for today, so it took a little longer doing that after they got complete. But right now, we'll call the St. Croix County Board of Supervisors to order. This is November 5th at 8:02. And the first thing we'll have is our invocation with Larry Seisman from the Faith Community Church. Everybody stand, please.
Good morning. Would you please join me in prayer? Father, as these men and women are placed in the position of vital decisions today, we ask that you make them mindful of the nearly 90,000 people with dreams and fears and ambitions that inhabit this county, that you give them perspective to the scale, not only of the people, but of the challenges and the opportunities. I ask that you'd give them wisdom in protecting the rights of the people while forging ideas that would lead to the flourishing of all, that they would respect the law and the electorate with humility and wisdom and love of neighbor. I ask that this county would continue and increase in its flourishing while maintaining respect for those who struggle. Give this body clarity of thought and speech this day. May they steward the resources and opportunities granted them for the common good, making St. Croix County a welcoming and safe place for not only the 90,000 here, but the many who visit. I ask that you'd help us to experience a county that values each and every person because they all bear your image. And so to that end, we ask that you'd help these proceedings to serve the good of all. I ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Well, everyone join me in Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Roll call at this time. We're ready. Maybe we're not. Thank you, everyone. At this time, we'll have public comment, and this is a 3-minute time on this, so we limit that, and that's the time we do have. So we have, we're open for public comment. I have one here, Chuck Rang, if he wants to step to the podium. Give your name and.
Thank you. Does this microphone work?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I want to start by just showing you something here. You can all see it. This is from the New Richmond News and Hudson Star Observer today. And the headline is perhaps a little misleading. The headline is perhaps a little misleading. It says, County Park issue sparks outrage. This is about the Eckert's Bluffland property and involves the Starwoods Conservancy. And the spokesperson for that conservancy indicated that she was outraged and disturbed and so forth, various negative words by the actions of the county. I, on the other hand, was a little outraged myself when I read the article. I first read it online and then I got it in the print form. The problem apparently involves a fear by the people who live in Star Woods that somebody might step on their property. And we know and we respect trespassing laws. The question I have is why this ever came up, because if they're concerned about it, we have laws which say if you put up you don't even have to put up the signs, but they might want to in this case. put up no trespassing signs. They're cheap. You can put up a lot of them if you want. And if you want, you can put up a fence or even a wall. It's totally legal as long as you do it on your property, with certain zoning restrictions, perhaps, which never came up, at least in the article. However, if there's anybody here from Star Woods or they hear about this, I hope that they consider something that Robert Frost, the poet, made clear, in which he said, in mending walls, I'd like to know what you're walling in or walling out. Perhaps you're walling out if you build a wall or a fence. Some little kid who wants to pick up an acorn and show it to his father or mother if they're walking in the Eckert's Bluff land and they see it 2 feet over into the other side. Anyway, I don't think that public money should be wasted on issues like this. I don't think public money should be used to buy no trespassing signs for people who can obviously afford no trespassing signs. That's my comment, and I hope you consider it, and it gives you some courage to hold your ground. Thank you.
We're still open for public comment on or off the agenda. Does anybody else have anything they want to say? Open for public comment on or off the agenda. One more time, open for public comment on or off the agenda. It's the end of our public comment. Thank you. I have the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented? Supervisor Peterson, do I have a second? Supervisor Osnes. Is there any discussion? We have a motion and a second on the floor for the consent agenda. Not seeing any. We'll vote on that at this time. That's all yeses. Thank you. Annual report. We don't see any presentations or recognitions. So annual report from the Community Development Department. Ellen Denzer, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. So you all have had a copy of the annual report, and I know that it's always a great idea to just highlight one or two items, and I would just draw your attention to page 3 and our revenues and our expenses, and point out that we've been doing really well at keeping our expenses down and maintaining our revenues. And I'd also just point out that one of the very few areas where we've gone over budget has been household hazardous waste, and in that area we have seen really a tremendous outpouring from residents in the county who have spent a lot of time being concerned and attending and participating. And I know that in some cases we've heard some comments from people who had to wait in lines. The lines are because we have a huge demand. We really do. We have a lot of people who really want to come and participate and bring hazardous waste. The number of small businesses that participated is increasing. The number of farmers that are participating has increased, and of course the number of residents. And just a quick set of numbers for you, but the number of residents who participated this past spring, 2019, when we had a 2-day event, and the number of people who participated in this fall when we had a 1-day event was almost identical. And so we ran well over 400 people through in 1 day. And there were some lines, there were some delays. We do everything we can to prevent that, and for the most part, people are very supportive and understanding. But it's just a tremendous program, and I know that I hear a lot of comments, and I just want to pass them on to all of you, that because you do support this, we get a very small grant for the household hazardous waste collection, only $16,000. It costs us closer to $50,000, and the county does support that. And I get a lot of comments from citizens. Thank you. Thank you so much for supporting it. This is a great program. Please keep having it. The few that ask us to have it more often, I tell them, please call your supervisor. So, so I'll just leave you at that, and then ask if you have any questions for me.
Any questions for Ellen? Not seeing any. Thanks, Ellen, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Financial report from the county administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the board, in your packet, you have the financial reports, revenues and expenditures for the 5 standing committees. I've looked through them, and revenues at this point, we're 75% through the fiscal year. We have revenues that are within that threshold, and also expenditures. All 5 standing committees in those departments are showing good signs of having some budget surplus at the end of the fiscal year. Each of the 5 areas have in excess of 25% of budget remaining at this point. So that's a good indicator that we'll end the year on a positive footnote. And then we also have our capital improvement project status report in your packet. And we'll be talking more finance and budgeting and good stuff a little bit later in the agenda. So at this point, I would take any questions.
Any
If
questions
not-
for Pat?
Thank you.
Not seeing any, thank you. We'll move on to our public hearing portion, the summary for the 2020 county administrator's recommended budget. Do you have that, Pat, or?
Yes, we're going to do the summary and then have the public hearing. Is that correct,
Right.
Mr. Chairman? Okay. All right. This is a modified version of the PowerPoint that we spent quite a bit of time on last month at Committee of the Whole. So I'm going to literally fly through this. I guess I won't. There we go. Budget process and schedule, we're right on schedule. Today is November 5th. After we have a brief summary, we'll conduct a public hearing, hear comments from the public, and then the board will take up a resolution approving the budget with any modifications made by the board. This is the pyramid showing how the budget process is built, and it starts with county board strategic initiatives and administrators' goals, budget guidelines, and then ultimately department work plans. As I mentioned earlier, our equalized value was up 9.54%. Well, we exceed 10 billion in equalized value. I think it's about 10.2. Our net new construction was up 2.74%, which is the highest growth rate of all 72 counties in the state. Our bond rating, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later this morning, remains AA1, very strong bond rating, second highest bond rating possible for municipal government. And as I said, we're going to be talking about this a little bit later. Here's our debt schedule. You've seen this before. And I'll be speaking again to this a little bit later when we discuss the sale of the bonds for the capital project. Major revenue sources and major expenditure sources. I will point out that based on discussion and feedback that I got at the Committee of the Whole meeting, I did modify the county administrator's recommended budget. There was discussion about the addition of a position in the emergency 911 dispatch center. So I modified the administrator's recommended budget, and I added one additional dispatcher to the budget and also an additional position in the community development department. So those modifications are reflected in this slide. I adjusted the sales tax projected revenue up increased it by $50,000, and the remaining portion is funded through increased interest earnings projections. So those two revenue sources have been modified to incorporate the costs of the two additional positions. And then on the right side, the expenditures, the new positions on tax levy, that number has been modified to include the two additional positions to the administrator's recommended budget. So those positions have been added. They are included in the budget resolution this morning with offsetting revenues to fund the positions, so there would be no, at least for this year or for the 2020 budget, there would be no additional levy dollars associated with those positions. That's not to say in the future budgets based on revenue projections, whether or not that would continue to be the case in future years. There is another chart showing the breakdown of property or budgeted revenues, taxes, fees, charges for services, transportation, and fund balance. And there again, budgeted expenditures, same thing. The new positions added. This is a chart showing all the position requests that were made to administration for preparation of the 2020 budget. Those positions that were approved, those that were not approved, whether or not there was tax levy impact on those positions. You see the two highlighted lines. Those are the two additional positions, the addition of a planner GIS technician in community development, and the additional emergency telecommunicator in the emergency support services division. And there again, these are the recommended changes to the administrator's budget based on committee of the whole feedback. And I've already explained what those are. There's the chart showing the additional positions total. And then as I mentioned at committee of the whole, there were 4.5 actual position reductions made through efficiencies within certain departments, reorganization, restructuring. There is a summary of the employee benefit changes. You've seen this before. I won't go through it, but it's a big driver for our budget, and we need to keep an eye on this. Administration will monitor this very carefully throughout the year, but it becomes a driving force in the preparation of our budget, compensation and benefits. The mill rate continues to decline ever so slightly, but yet showing good trend. And this is an average mill rate, so it's a positive indicator of the factoring in of the increased growth and the ability to try to maintain the budget increases. And there's a summary of the tax levy and the mill rate, how that's calculated, and the modifications that I spoke to are included in these figures. And we're already looking ahead to 2021.
making some assumptions. This will all change, but we're already thinking ahead as we adopt today's budget for 2020. We're already, Ken's already crunching numbers for 2021. So budgeting is done that way nowadays. We look at a 2-year budget, and some of the decisions that we make today have an impact on our 2021 budget. So we don't do it in a vacuum. That's it for the summary of the budget. I think unless there are questions now, Mr. Chairman, I could entertain questions, or we can entertain questions after the public hearing. When you actually take up the resolution, it's up to you and the board.
It's up to the board, but we can wait till after the public hearing, and if we have questions, is that fine with the board?
All right.
Everybody okay with that? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
We'll move forward. It's 8:23, and the public hearing on the 2020 proposed budget per Wisconsin statute 65.93. So at this time, the public hearing is open for any comments on the 2020 budget. Is there anybody who'd like to make a comment on the 2020 budget?
There's none.
None. Not seeing anybody. We're going to move on to our business items,
Closed.
and the public hearing will be closed at this time. Thank you. Number one is a resolution awarding the sale of a $8,025,000 general obligation capital improvement bond, Series 2019A. Do I have a motion to Supervisor Peterson? I need a second to that. Do I see a second? Supervisor Schottner seconds it. We're open for discussion on that, and we'll turn over to Ken if he wants to work on that, and Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before the meeting, I handed out the sale day report, so I'd like to just spend a few minutes going through that report, discussing the results, as well as the update of the county's rating. Let's start from our last meeting, where the county settled on the amount of the borrowing, the $8,025,000. We've been working with county staff on putting together the official statement, and I believe everyone would have received this probably via email. This document contains a lot of information about the proposed financing and about the finances of St. Croix County. It was sent out to investors both in the region as well as nationwide, who then had the opportunity to bid today. The other major step prior to the sale yesterday was the updating of the county's bond rating. Pat had mentioned at the presentation that he just gave that the county has a AA1 bond rating. Included in the sale day report is the rating report prepared by Moody's Investor Service. We, Pat, Leah, and Ken, myself, had about an hour discussion with Moody's about the status of the county, the financing itself, the project. And really, as you'll look at the rating report, I encourage you all, when you have some time, to look at that. Oh, there we go, up on the screen, in a little more detail. I think what you'll come away reading it is that the county has a lot of credit strengths, a lot of positives are highlighted in the report. So you may say, well, okay, that's great, but why can't we be a AAA then, which is the very highest rating? And in big picture terms, what I'd mentioned to the committee previous to this, and I'll state again here for the full board, is a lot of the factors that would maybe be able to get the county to that AAA rating are factors that are not in your control. So just a simple example, the median county that has a AAA rating has a tax base of 40 to 50 billion. The county's tax base is 10 billion. So that's not something that you as elected officials have direct control over. But when Moody's does ratings, they compare you to everybody throughout the country, and that's just a factor that is part of that rating process. The ones that you do have a lot of direct control over, I'd say it's clear in the report that Moody's believes that the county elected officials and management staff are doing a very good job of controlling those factors. And when we put all that together, that is the reason you've got that very, very high AA1 rating. So when we completed that process, we go a couple more pages back in the report, you will come to the bid tabulation. Yesterday at 11:30, we put out the $8,025,000 for competitive bids. As you look at the bid tabulation, you'll see we ended up getting 5 bids, very competitive amongst the bidders. The best bid is showing up on the screen right now, was from Piper Jaffray with a 2.15% true interest rate. So when we get bids, we ask them to give us the interest rates and the price that they will pay for the bonds. And when we put that through a computer calculation, we can generate what's called a true interest rate, and that is what we use to determine which of those proposals was the best or lowest cost proposal for the county. That Piper Jaffray bid at the 2.15% was the best bid, but if you look at the next couple of bidders on the second page, you'll see that they were right behind. So really, these bidders were all viewing the county very favorably, and that translated into the competitive bids that they provided to the county yesterday morning. With that, I wanted to give an update to an exhibit that we had previously shared with the pre-sale report going all the way back to August. What we've done on Exhibit 1 up on the screen now is we took that winning bid from Piper Jaffray and put the results of that into a spreadsheet we'd shared previously with the county in terms of our expectation of the results of this sale. We had looked at preliminarily interest rates back in the pre-sale report from August, right around 3%, and you'll see with the results of the sale today, as I'd mentioned, we're more in that 2.15, 2.16 if we round up interest rate in terms of the results of the sale. That ultimately translates, because of the reduction in the interest rate from the pre-sale report, into lower total interest costs that the county has to pay on the debt over the next 20 years as the debt is repaid. And just to put this debt issue into bigger context, Exhibit 2 is another exhibit we shared in the pre-sale report, so we've updated it today. The blue bars are representative of the county's existing debt prior to the issuance of the proposed bonds today. The green bars are the new debt and the repayment of that added to the county's existing debt. So what I would highlight for the board here is that the county's debt, principal and interest payments on all of it, the levy will be just around a little bit more than $6 million approximately. You may use some different funds in there, but about that. And then over time, you'll see, and I think Pat alluded to this in the administrator's budget, that the way that staff have put together the debt plan is your debt is falling off over time. We mentioned to Moody's when we had the discussion with them, Ken had mentioned that it was probably unlikely the county would do any debt until about maybe 4 to 5 years out from now because, and this is a credit strength of the county, you're able to fund a lot of your capital projects with cash, which is a great way to be able to do it to the extent that you can. And what that means is if we were to do a debt issue 4 to 5 years out, the debt levy is set to fall so that that new debt could be layered, hopefully on top, without spiking that debt service levy up way above the current level that you're at. So that represents, I think, really good long-term capital planning and debt management going out into the future. What's needed today of action of the county board to accept the winning bid from Piper Jaffray is to approve the resolution that I believe county board members probably have either on your screen or at your disposal, that would award the sale of the $8,025,000 in general obligation bonds. It would lock into the terms that I mentioned. One other term that came up at the committee meeting, I'll just mention here for the group. The interest rates would be locked in for the full 20-year period if the county board does accept that bid from Piper Jaffray. But we did include in the bid an option that the county has to either prepay the issue or potentially refund if lower interest rates are available. That would be in year 8 of 20. At that point or later, the county could either prepay the issue or refund the issue at your option. So that's not an option that the rates could go up at that time. It's just if a better option or better rates were available or you had cash to prepay, you could take care of that or you could take advantage of that option at that time. So again, in order to move forward, you would need to approve that resolution today. We would certainly recommend approval of the resolution, but before any action, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay. Are there any questions from the board? Supervisor Malik.
Sean, is a AA1 negative better or worse than a AA1?
Yeah, in the report, I think it references some surrounding communities, Buck, which I think was St. Paul and Minneapolis, which have those AA1 negative. The AA1 without the negative is a better rating. The negative outlook represents that the rating agency has some concerns about the current status of the rating and it could be going down potentially. That negative outlook is not something that St. Croix County has, but these other communities currently do. So you are at a better position not having that negative outlook.
Or to use my terminology, they're at an A- and we're at an A.
Yeah, they are trending in a direction that their rating could possibly fall. Moody's does not believe that you are trending in a direction currently that a negative outlook should be put on the county's rating.
One other question. The table says that, and the text also says that the median family income, apparently this is of St. Croix County, is 129.1%. It looks like it, of the U.S. median. Am I understanding that correctly, that the median income in St. Croix County is greater than the median income of the rest of the country by 29%?
The median.
The median.
Yes, correct. So that is certainly a credit strength of the county. The wealth indices as compared to other counties throughout the country, you in St. Croix County are in a stronger position than the median.
Any other questions for Sean? Not seeing any. Thank you, Sean. And we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve this general obligation bond. Do we have any discussion on it or any other questions this time? Supervisors?
Well, I just want to say I voted against the resolution at our administration committee meeting just before this. And that's because I'm not in support of the jail project. And I've spoken on this before, but I feel like we were not really provided with any other solution to improve the safety in the jail other than the building of the new jail cells for the cost of $8 million. And this problem of mental health, people being in a mental health crisis in jails is a problem that's really happening throughout the state of Wisconsin and the United States. And there's multiple solutions out there, or at least strategies, we'll say. Some include, there's been improved safety simply by adding more training to staff. In Sauk County, there's, in a Wisconsin Counties Association magazine, there's an article on how they're dealing with mental health crises by improving collaboration between their Health and Human Services Department and the jail. So I feel like we just really were, this building of the jail cells for $8 million was pushed through without. And so I would like the process to slow down, and so I voted against the resolution.
That turned her off.
Just trying to hand it
I don't think that worked.
Supervisor Malik.
Mr. Chairman, that seems to be working. Thank you. Does hers work still? It sounded like it turned off.
Testing.
It works.
A lot of distortion going on.
Yes, there is. And I haven't even begun to talk. Sorry about that. Mr. Chairman, I suppose that I should renew this request when it comes time for future topics, and I plan to do that. But since Supervisor Mudadan has brought this up at this point, I want to say that although I supported the project for the conversion of the gym into additional cells, I did so for the reason of safety of our officers and safety of the inmates. But I do not consider that a solution to the problems of inmates who have problems that need diagnosis and some sort of solution for mental or other related problems. Probably too complex for me to diagnose, certainly. But I continue to think that the Public Protection Committee and either the Public Protection Committee or the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee or both should continue to work on a solution, maybe in the direction of what no, you're out of luck. This is going from, anyway. It's a really serious concern. We've heard about problems of folks who have intoxication issues or mental health issues, and then are brought into our jail. They generally don't get better in the jail, and we need to do something about it. And therefore, although I support the conversion of the gym to the cells, as mentioned earlier, I don't consider that the end of the discussion. And I think that we have a really serious duty to continue and to be innovative, and it may cost money. Who knows in advance? It may have to do with different procedures. But I do urge you, Mr. Chairman, to continue to put pressure on the committees that have the opportunity to do something about it, to continue to look for.
Thank you. Supervisor.
I just want to say that I agree with Supervisor Matt. Everything he said is right. But I also want to make him feel a little bit better about the process. Our CJCC is very active. We've had Geneva as chairman, and the criminal committee with Judge Nordstrom, our former colleague. They are, I think, close to their, and they are broad representation. Prosecutors, judges, everybody, the faith community, and everybody else are interested in this. And I think we would all be very, very proud of the creativity that they're displaying and the hard work that those committees are displaying every day relative to the problems with our jails. The only other thing I would suggest is we have to remember that the $8 million isn't just for the jail. It was for the substantial improvements in our building in the HVAC system. So only a portion of it went toward the jail.
Okay. Supervisor Hanson.
I was thinking that my hearing aid was messing up, and then I remembered I don't wear hearing aids. So I appreciate deeply to hear that we're going to focus on the mental health issues. I dug my heels in hard against the project. And I'll explain this. I've suffered my whole life with some mental health issues, and I don't mind saying that. How's this? Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. And I want to tell you that there, but for the grace of God go I, that I'm not a person who ended up in the situation in the video that we saw. I'm blessed to have a good family and a good support network and a good education, and my heart goes out to the people that we saw who suffered with mental illness and end up in jail, because you're more likely to be arrested with a mental health issue than you are to get mental health care in our society today. We need to do something about that. I'll support this bond, but I sat here celebrating the good news of our bond rating and of the rate that we have got when we sold this bond yesterday, and then I cast a pall over it, thinking about why we're doing this. So I really truly encourage our efforts, the CJCC and Supervisor Fiedler, and I hope that we can all join in seeking a solution and continuing that right away as a current effort and making it a priority. Just as important as providing clean water is to provide good mental health care. And thank you very much.
Do I have any other comments or questions at this time? We have a motion and a second on the floor, so we'll vote at this time. And that general obligation bond of $8,025,000. Two noes, one abstained, and the rest yes, so it passes. Thank you. We'll move on to our next business item, resolution approving library exemption from tax levy. I have a motion, Supervisor Peterson. Do I have a second for that, Supervisor Schoberg? Any discussion on that? Not seeing any discussion, we'll vote. We have a motion and a second on that. Oh, yeah. There. Lord, why? That's all yeses on that. Thank you. The next one is a resolution to charge back municipalities due to incorrect real estate taxes. I have a motion, Supervisor Peterson. Do I have a second? Supervisor Malik. Discussion on that? No discussion? Then we have a motion and a second. We'll vote. Did we get that? Need a second from? Thank you. That's all yeses. Thank you. Next item is resolution adopting budget and establishing a tax levy. Supervisor Peterson, the motion. Do I have a second? Supervisor Schoberg. Any questions or discussion? Not seeing any. We have Supervisor Fosterling.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes. Well, I have a number of thoughts on this, but I guess to start with, I had voted against the increase on the tax levy at the admin committee. And the reason why is I felt even if we took, the 2.75% away for the, new construction, we still are left with 3.16% increase. And I just felt that was too much, when we consider, the general dynamics of the, the economy. Social Security is going up 1.6%. The cost of the consumer price index is up 2%. Even our county employees are increased salaries are going up 2%. And I've talked to a number of people in the community, and in basically describing the same kind of situation. And effectively, what it is we're, if our spouses came home and said that, they received a $2,000 raise, and we said that our response to that was we were going to spend $3,100 more in expenses, to buy things. It just doesn't work, for a household budget. And so I think that it makes sense for us to think in terms of how can we cap, that level. I think we're already, even in terms of pushing the 2.76, our population is not growing at 2.75%. We're not even growing that fast. And so we're using all of it. We're using all of that new construction, to add to the tax base. But on a 10-year basis, we expect to grow about 6.5% over 10 years. So that's 0.65, per year average. So, even if everybody is using, who lives in the county is using the same amount of services as they were in the prior years, and the only people who are needing more services are people who are new, to the county. 2.74% means that, they can need services or commit crimes or whatever at a level 4 times the rate of people living in the county. I don't think that's likely. So, we're really, we're pushing the envelope, I think, when we use 5.91%, as an increase in the tax levy. And so I'm proposing, now, I suggested, at the admin committee, that we cap it at 2%. I think, really it goes back to who wants to reopen, this situation here. We've got momentum going. But after thinking about it, I thought there is a reasonable solution to this. And what I'm suggesting is that we just take $400,000 from the sale of the county building, which wasn't contemplated in the budget, and take that $400,000 and apply it against the operating budget. That would bring us back down to 2% for that piece. We still have the 2.75%, which is a result of new construction and expiration of tax incremental districts. So I think what I'm asking for is really kind of a modest thing for the taxpayers of St. Croix County. And some people might point out that, well, we're already dropping our rate, our mill rate, but our values, the prices of our homes, theoretically, according to the Economic Development Committee, has gone up 6.3% over the last year. And that's all good in terms of our assets, but it doesn't translate to cash flow. What it really means is that, when it comes to replacing the roof or, replacing, the driveway or replacing the furnace, it's going to cost more. And so taxpayers, it's costing more, with, these increases in values. So it's not really a good reason to say, we don't need to drop the mill rate that much. So I really think that just like, this building right here, it's gone up in value in the last year, probably. And, but, that doesn't mean that, we don't need additional funds to replace the HVAC system. And that's the same way it is, for the taxpayers in this county. So I am making a motion, and that motion would be to take $400,000, from the sale of the transportation building. Yep. Yes, it would be an amendment, yes. So it would be an amendment to, the levy increase. And so, and because of the fact that we haven't closed on that building yet, my thought would be is we just take $400,000 out of what was already transferred last month, $3 million we transferred over to the CIP fund, take that $400,000 back temporarily until the building is sold, and then replenish, that fund. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, my proposal or my amendment to the resolution.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to second the motion. And if I could also make a quick comment and question to Supervisor Fosterling. As I understand it, your motion will not change in any way the expenditure side of the budget. There will be no personnel cut, no programs cut. This will be identical to what the county administrator has proposed earlier this morning and what the administration committee adopted last week. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I need a motion and a second.
You're,
Could I so move or make a motion? You just need to push your button. Okay. Okay. Am I doing it right or what's the button I have to push? Okay. Push the second. Can I try that? The purple one.
Ken, as long as you're standing there, I'd like to know, or like to hear comments from you if you don't mind, being finance director.
Well, I think the county administrator put together a very good budget. So that was the recommendation that came from administration, is the way that he laid it out, thinking of the county in a long-term fashion.
Supervisor Peterson.
Hopefully mine is not as garbled as some. I understand the concern of some board members of holding the tax line. But I would prefer, we've had administration go through to the best of their ability to come up with a budget and a sensible budget. We just had a bond interest rate of 2.1% because of our fiscal policies. And so I think we're doing a lot of things right. And I would prefer or lean in the direction of, if we do have extra money laying around, for lack of a better term, apply that to maybe bonds and save our taxpayers some money there and have a good handle on things. I'm just in very general terms. So I would vote against this amendment and support the original budget. Thank you.
Supervisor Hanson?
So the capital improvement plan is a policy which it's not extra money laying around. We are dedicated to taking care of our assets, and in doing so, we are doing good fiscal management because it's a lot more expensive to replace things and repair things that are broken badly than it is to maintain things. I would oppose this amendment because, as Dave said, we have an excellent administrator. We pay really, really premium money to have a really, really premium administrator, and we need to trust him. And it says right on the cover, it's the county administrator recommended budget. And I have come over the past 6 years to trust Patrick Thompson to give us good advice, and I intend to follow that good advice. This is a good budget, and I think we should stick with it. Oh, and I don't like the idea of, I want to add, I don't like the idea of taking money that we don't have out of the capital improvement plan, $400,000, and relying on a real estate transaction that may not happen because it hasn't closed. Again, talking about a real estate transaction that hasn't closed, what happens if that deal goes bust? What happens if we end up taking $400,000 out of CIP, the deal doesn't close, and now we are $400,000 short in CIP? It's too much of a risk for me to be able to consider. Thank you.
Supervisor Schoberg?
I think the one you gave to me, Buck. Excuse me. Well, I appreciate our supervisors down the desks for their modest proposal, and that they put some thought together for it. So we at least can study it and determine how best to respond to it. I'm sorry, it's your cookie that you gave me. But I was at the administration committee meeting just before this, and our financial advisor said, one of the reasons we have the bond rating we do is that we have cash for the rainy day. And they were especially impressed with the fact that we had this CIP plan that has funding so that for the future projects that we know that are going to occur, we don't have to resort to bonding. So that's good news for a bonding agency to know that we don't have to come back and borrow money because we have a plan to use cash. And I know even Supervisor Coulter taught me a long time ago that he'd rather pay for things with cash than to borrow money. So for the reason of maintaining our good bond rating, I'd like to leave the CIP plan alone and stick with that because we studied that many times. And as far as all of the percentages and everything like that, I can find stats to counter Supervisor Fosterling's stats, but I won't. We just know that you can make an argument either way. But I just want to reserve the fund balance as much as we can. So I'll speak against the amendment.
Any other discussion on this amendment? I'm not seeing any. Supervisor Feddersen.
Ken, could you go to the podium? Just a quick question for Ken. The offer on the highway facility, is that a cash offer?
It's a cash offer.
And it's due within 60 to 90 days?
Yeah, the projected closing's right around the end of the year or the beginning of next year.
Okay. And will all the funds from it go to the KIP fund?
Minus any closing fees or real estate.
So roughly $1.5 million that had not been expected will go to the KIP fund on the sale, the cash offer sale for the highway facility.
Yep, the fund balance policy of the county is that any funds from sale of property go to the KIP fund unless they're designated otherwise by the county board.
Okay. Any other discussion on the amendment? Supervisor Ackerman?
Hopefully this is, I'm just going to say that I remember when we first started the KIP fund, we wanted to borrow, I may be off, like $5 million to catch up so that we could everything could be done. That got voted down. So any money, even though you're saying that's a lot of money from the sale of the Hammond building, that still doesn't cover what the KIP fund needs to do what it needs to do to bring us up to a level where everything is in repair and we're on a maintenance basis. We're still playing catch-up. And even with the funds from the sale of the Hammond building, we'll still be playing catch-up for a while. So I would have to vote against this.
Any other discussion on the amendment? Not seeing any. We have a motion and second to amend the budget. And I'm not going to repeat all that Supervisor Fosterling said, but everybody listened to that, so we'll vote at this time. And that, there was 5 yeses, the rest noes, so that failed. So we'll move on to the original resolution adopting the budget and establishing a tax levy. Is there any discussion on that anymore? If not, we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve that, so at this time we'll vote on that.
Supervisor Schulter didn't hear second.
Okay, what?
Ready to vote.
Ready to vote? That's 3 noes and the rest are yeses, so that passes too. Thank you, everyone. Number 5 on our list is a resolution approving application for county conservation aid grants from 2019-2023. Do I have a motion? Supervisor Hanson, motion. Do I have a second to that? Supervisor Malik seconds that. Any discussion? No, Supervisor Hanson.
I just wanted to say conservation aids grants go to improving those areas of the county that may not otherwise get improved. They're areas where people can enjoy wildlife in a areas with low impact that put in a small parking lot so people can walk into a field and do bird watching, maybe do a little bit of hunting. The Sportsman's Alliance has been critical in helping to decide where we assign this grant. And over the past many decades, 5 decades, we've been able to, or more, utilize that grant, and it's a very good thing.
Okay. Supervisor Malik?
I've been involved in the Sportsman's Alliance for many years, and these small projects, which are under around $2,000 from the state and have to be matched 100%, usually leverage something. Sometimes they're enough to pay the whole amount. Our current use for this year, for 2020 and next year likely, is to leverage $45,000 project to build some fishing piers on the southwest bay of Lake Malibu in Hudson. No money's been spent in Hudson for decades. Normally, as Dan says, they're spread around the county, a little parking lot here and there, that sort of thing. I think it's money well spent, and this is a pro forma resolution that needs to be done periodically. It's been done without fail for many decades. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Questions? Not seeing any. We have a motion and a second on the floor. We'll vote at this time, Cindy. One abstain, the rest are all yeses. That passes. Thank you. Our last one on our agenda for today is the ordinance repealing Chapter 17 of the St. Croix County Code of Ordinances entitled Zoning and reenacting Chapter 17 entitled Zoning and Chapter 15 of the St. Croix County Code of Ordinances, comprehensive revision to the zoning ordinance. I need a motion, Supervisor Hanson. I need a second, Supervisor Tatum. Thank you. Now we'll have a presentation on that. Any questions during the time we can ask.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. My name is John Hilgers, planner with Community Development. Before you today for your consideration is an ordinance that would approve the St. Croix County Comprehensive Zoning Revision. Within your packet today, you do have the revised and updated code along with the revised zoning map. These items were recently recommended for approval by the Community Development Committee on October 17th. We're just going to go quickly through our PowerPoint presentation. It's somewhat similar to the one you saw in June of this year when we were here to give you an update prior to the public hearing, which was held in July. Really, the purpose of our update for the comprehensive zoning revision was to comply with state statute. A number of changes have been made at the legislature regarding how jurisdictions across the state can regulate certain land uses such as solar power, wind energy, and there were also changes to statute regarding conditional use permit provisions and how counties and cities administer those. And also it was a good chance for the county to reach out and meet with our towns. Looking back into the history of St. Croix County zoning, there really hasn't been a complete comprehensive revision of the entire zoning ordinance. So this is really a good opportunity to reach out and talk to our towns. Just a reminder for the county board, these revisions do not impact any cities or villages. They are under their own jurisdiction when it comes to zoning. The project began in 2017, so we've been at this for over 2 years. And a lot of that time has been spent reaching out to our towns across the county, as well as our public. We had a number of open houses. I won't go into detail, but we've had over 50 meetings thus far. Initially in the process, we met with groups of towns at one time with common geography to talk about issues. We had a citizen task force that was established. We had a meeting with local development professionals, as well as check-in meetings with the Community Development Committee and you, the county board. And then we also had an interactive web page as part of this process where people could go in, view the code, and make comments as we went along throughout our process. Basically, when we started our process, one of the questions we asked our residents and towns is what is working with our code and what is in need of updating. So from the hundreds of comments we received, we kind of narrowed them down into 5 themes, and you see them on the overhead. But a few of them had to do with agricultural, obviously with St. Croix County being a strong agricultural community, but also with the growth that the county is seeing, there was some concern about there being a balance between allowing the rural subdivisions and the rural homes and protecting ag lands. Also addressing the conflict between industrial agriculture and rural housing land enjoyment. Addressing the different needs of the urbanizing towns and the rural towns, especially for commercial uses, especially as the western end of the town is seeing a bit more growth than the central and eastern part of the county. We also had numerous discussions regarding our agricultural entertainment uses across the county. Right now, wedding venues and harvest festivals and things of that nature are only allowed in our certified agricultural districts, which are the Ag 1 and Ag 2 districts. The code now loosens that up a little bit to allow towns the flexibility to adopt a special commercial district to allow those. And lastly, we had comments about making our ordinance more user-friendly. We've inserted more graphics and tables to help explain our code, and just better organization. We've put the more useful parts of the code up front, such as what people can and can't do with their property, the district regulations, and things of that nature. So getting into the summary of proposed changes, right now we do have a current zoning ordinance. And in that zoning ordinance, about 70% of the county is covered under one large zoning district called the Rural Residential Zoning District. And within that district, we have a large array of uses that can be held in that area. We do allow major residential subdivisions with 2-acre lot minimums in these areas. But we also allow major livestock facilities, up to 499 animal units, and then over 500 with a conditional use permit. We also allow junkyards and slaughterhouses with a conditional use permit. So one of the things we heard from residents in the open houses in some of our towns is that the county needs to do a little bit better job in separating those uses, especially as the demographics are changing and we're seeing more development across the county. So what we're going to be doing is proposing some additional districts to eliminate this one-size-fits-all, the rural residential district, and to really begin to address the distinctions between the developing areas of the county, more so on the west side, compared to those not facing some of the development pressure. So right now I would like to introduce Jason Valerius. Jason is with MSA Professional Services. The county contracted with Jason and his team with MSA to kind of help the county guide through this process. So Jason's going to come up and just kind of highlight the summary of changes with the code update, and then we'll answer any questions you may have. Thank you. Jason?
All right, pleased to be here again. We did a check-in with you, I think it was in June, it was earlier this year, to bring you up to speed on where we were at the process, and this is going to be a pretty similar presentation, but want to remind you and make sure you're familiar with what you're being asked to adopt today. So just to do a quick run through then of what's significant in this updated ordinance. The rural residential would be broken out into two different districts, an R1 and an R2. So the R1 is similar, except that it reduces the total density of housing, rural housing that could be allowed, down to a density of 1 dwelling unit per 10 acres, and then it maintains the current RR policies regarding animal units, so you could still have larger farms with lots of animal units on those farms. Major subdivisions aren't allowed in the R1, and the minimum lot size is revised from 2 acres to 1.5 acres. Then the R2 is similar to rural residential, except that it cuts down the number of animal units allowed, so the large, those large livestock farms aren't possible in the R2, and again, the minimum lot size is reduced from 2 to 1.5 acres. That change doesn't really change much, the minimum lot size, because most of the towns have in their own subdivision ordinance a 2-acre minimum, but the county wanted to allow for a little bit more flexibility if towns want to allow that also. Finally, the R3 is similar to and replaces the current residence district. It would require public sewer, community septic, and public or community water supply, and it would have some basic landscaping requirements and screening. Commercial districts, there's one right now, and with the change there will be 3. C1, similar to your current commercial district, except that it now no longer requires paving, and the amount of landscaping that would be required is reduced. C2 is an entirely new animal, is created to address the desire for those ag tourism uses. So if supported by the towns can support the use of that district. And then the C3 is basically the same as the current commercial district. Regarding procedures within the code, there is a procedure that kind of spells out a little more clearly how the town recommendations process should work on zoning changes. And then, as John mentioned, there are some shifts in state law regarding how conditional use permits are handled, and that kind of procedure is spelled out in the code. Regarding specific development standards, we looked at access management and driveways, and so there's a couple of changes there, including allowing second driveways in a few instances and eliminating the requirement that you would create a public road where you currently have a private road if it's providing access to 3 or more lots. That's something that's no longer really possible under case law in the state, so we cleaned that up. Clarification about how steep slopes are to be measured. And then for parking and loading, the paving requirements are revised. So again, not all commercial has to be paved. Asphalt or concrete is required in the R3, C3, I1, and I2. You'll see in that list, if you looked closely, that there's a C4 listed. That was our typo. At one time in this process, we were talking about a C4 district, which was intended for those rural hamlets, those kind of historic clusters here in the town, and then ultimately decided through the process and through feedback that the shallower setbacks that district would have created weren't going to work very well, and so C3 is in use in those hamlet areas. C4 isn't in the ordinance. So just to be clear about that. In terms of regulation on specific uses, there's some things worth pointing out. There are now regulations to allow for the keeping of chickens and ducks on smaller residential parcels. Limit of 12, has to be females, have to be in a hen house. So the county continues to hear on a regular basis interest in that. It's not widespread, but they come up on a regular basis, people wanting to do this. So regulations to allow for it. Fence and wall heights are regulated, including a 6-foot 6-foot limit along lot lines. These changes don't really affect ag uses. Fences around ag uses are unaffected by the changes in the ordinance. Home occupations, you have been regulating them. The change adds a little more flexibility to those regulations, allowing more of the home to be used, allowing a greater total square footage, reducing the required buffer to neighboring homes, and allowing a transfer from one owner to another owner. A little bit of change with housing regulations, just the notion of tiny houses is something that's been more prominent in the past decade or so, and they are allowed through a special process known as the planned development process. They'd be allowed in a planned development district. So with additional review, they could be possible. And then, as John noted, the solar and wind energy regulation, we're ensuring that your code corresponds to what's possible under state statutes. Commercial kennels, there's been a fair amount of conversation about this, so some loosening of setbacks required to allow for commercial kennels. But still, in the current draft, some relatively tight restrictions on how many dogs or cats can be outdoor at any one time, requirement for a waste management plan, requirement that animals have to be inside at night. There is a section on short-term rentals, the Airbnb language, which basically is referring to other laws and ordinances already in use, both at the state level and at the county level, administered by the health department. So talking about process, and John can jump in here as he sees fit, but once you adopt, the towns have a year from the date of your adoption to adopt the code themselves. And to remind you and be clear, this code has two parts. It has the text part and it has the map part. And the text part applies to everyone, and the map part applies to every bit of land. And the county has been doing good work. We've all been working together, but county staff have really been making an effort to analyze and understand all of the parcels across the county. We have been working with the towns to review what they want to see, especially as we are splitting the RR into two districts and splitting the commercial into two districts, the C1 and the C3. And so the map that we have right now is a pretty good shot at what we think is going to be the map long term. The text is definitely intended to be the text. Once you adopt it, that should be the text for the next couple of years. But we recognize that as the towns go through this process of themselves proactively adopting this, because until they do, all the land in that town is subject to the current ordinance. They can't use this new one until they actually adopt the new one. So they've got that year, but John, if you want to maybe talk about the intended process for how any final map adjustments are going to be made, I think that's an important thing.
So one unique feature to this process is that if the county board adopts the ordinance today, as Jason mentioned, the text will be locked in place. However, we are going to be giving towns across the county a 180-day grace period, which would allow them to make any tweaks or changes to the zoning map that they may have missed, or if residents weren't aware of what was going on, they're going to have this extra 6 months to make these changes. And that's because we reviewed as part of this process about 22,000 parcels. A couple caveats to that is that these revisions being requested must be consistent with the town land use plan and be endorsed by the respective town board. So it can't be just residents coming to the county saying, hey, I want my zoning map changed. It has to go through the respective town boards. There will be no fees for this process. This will be a one-time process for all towns that choose to enter into county zoning. And the anticipated hearing date to make these final tweaks or changes would be a public hearing with the Community Development Committee in May of 2020. And another important thing to note, no upzoning would be allowed. So for example, if somebody wanted to rezone their parcel to a more intense land use, say from residential to commercial, that would not be allowed. That has too significant an impact on adjacent properties, and that would have to be a special process on their own. And then as Jason mentioned earlier, again, from the date of county board approval, towns will have up to 12 months to choose to opt into this code, which is Chapter 15. Until then, the towns will be using our current code, which is the Chapter 17 and map, until they adopt the new one. And then if towns do nothing after 12 months, they will not have county zoning in effect. So pending board approval, staff will be immediately communicating what towns need to do to take it to the next step and to opt in to county zoning. One other unique feature I'd like to point out, we are using a software system called Encode. If you've had the chance to look through the 156-page document, online you can scroll over definitions and statute reference and they will be hyperlinked and take you right there. Over time, we will have other county zoning or county ordinances transition to this software system. The nice thing about this is that we'll track amendments and save them by date over time. So we can go back, once the system is up for 10 years, we can go back and see what happened today. So that concludes our overview, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Are there any questions or discussion? Supervisor Akhtarov.
Yeah, I would like to make an amendment to this zoning, and I've talked to community development. In fact, you all have a sheet handed to you about kennels, commercial kennels. It's in the packet on page 376.
We need, point of order, we need a motion for the,
I thought we had a motion.
We do.
Yeah, we have.
do we have a motion?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, forgive me, Judy.
Okay, and, okay, losing track. I'm a dog person, I'm biased, but I thought it was pretty rigid what we had, even though that they were improving, it still wasn't where I thought it should be. It still isn't even with the amendment, but it's better, it's a step in the right. I called all the kennels in St. Croix County. Most of them got back to me, and most of them are in cities or villages and have far more that are run. They have, either more than 4 runs or they let out a lot more than, there's one kennel that lets out 30 dogs at a time, legally, because of where they're located. But I would like this amendment done just because it brings a little bit more reality to what is actually being done, not necessarily what the county may want and feel that it's the right thing, but what is being done legally because, of where they're located. But yeah, the change is in red on the sheet that you have, and like I've said, I've worked with community development, and they're okay with it. In fact, they're the ones that came up with this change. So I'd like to make a motion to amend Section 15.355, Kennels Commercial, Section 3C, 1 and 2.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on that? Any discussion on the amendments? Foster?
Yeah, I'm just not clear here as, and I haven't gone to the original, but in the red line, is that an addition or is it a replacement? Yeah, okay, so in other words, the ordinance is otherwise silent on that? Is that?
Yeah, it had 4 total. It didn't matter how many runs you had for number 1, and in number 2, it had 2 total, and that was animals out. So if you had, example for number 1, the new one was saying 4 dogs. So if you had 4 runs, you could only have 1 dog per run. But the way this is said, it says 16, so you could have up to 4 dogs or cats per enclosure. But if you only had 3 outdoor runs, you could only have 12 max. Yeah.
Any other questions or discussion?
If I could just
Supervisor
ask, I like dogs too, but I don't like barking dogs. So what was the reason that we were less willing to go all the way up to 16 before? If I could ask community development to explain that.
Yeah, so up until the 2011, the county had a 700-foot setback for kennel structures from their property line. In 2011, that was amended down to 300 feet, but then the number of animals were capped at 2 outside at any one time. And so up until this update process, that's the code that's been in effect. What's on the draft code or what's in your ordinance is that we bumped that up to 4 outside at any one time, but only in the ag districts and the commercial districts. And then a cap of 2 in the proposed R1 district. And the R1 district, again, allows 1 unit per 10 acres, the thought process being less residential density. Kennels could be, issued through a conditional use permit in that area. And then as we had discussions over the last few months with community development, Board Member Achterhoff was doing some additional research and provided staff with some of what she was finding, and then we, at her request, went ahead and tried to draft something that would reflect what she's proposing today, which is the red line that you have in front of you.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions? We have Supervisor Malik.
I've dealt with this in the Board of Adjustment and in the town of Hudson where I live, which has its own zoning, on a number of occasions over the last decades that I've been involved in this sort of thing. And it's all about noise and the neighbors. And so because of neighbors' complaints about losing sleep to barking dogs, the town of Hudson has usually been pretty strict about new kennels. Of course, old kennels have whatever they have at the time that they started up. They're grandfathered. And the Board of Adjustment has tended to be fairly conservative about this also, although the Board of Adjustment did recommend and then support the change in 2011, which changed the separation distance down from 700 feet to 300 feet, but also reduced the number of animals or put a limit on the number of animals. None of us really knows what's the right answer in a thing like this, because none of us can really predict the future. But those of you who have spent an hour on the phone with Supervisor Achterhoff will appreciate when I say that she wore me down, and I'm willing to acquiesce in this, although I don't know. Nobody knows what the future holds with respect to barking dogs. I don't understand why a commercial kennel can't afford to buy bark collars, and I am not sympathetic with the argument that bark collars are inhumane. My wife and we are definitely dog people. I've had a dog most of my life, and life without a dog is not worth living, in my opinion. But the bark collars have not been damaging to our dogs, and they do them no psychic or physical or other harm. They quickly learn that the sound that precedes the shock is the signal to conform their behavior. When they hear that little beep, they stop barking. And it seems to me that commercial kennels should use that. But as I say, I have been persuaded, and I will vote in support of this amendment.
Supervisor Hanson.
It's a growing business. I think, I see it as a matter of economic development. As the population grows, the number of dog owners grow, people need to leave town, they need a place to put their dog. People who have puppies need a place to train their dogs. I have a friend who trains dogs, and during the transition between classes, the number of dogs at the kennel goes up by the number of dogs in the class, and then they are in violation. And when the number is so small, they were actually cited in the town of Hudson because during this transition, the person who does that violation, who's in charge of watching for that ordinance, cited them because they had 6 dogs too many while they were just in transition between classes. Just want to give them a chance, all of them a chance to do business. And I know that when somebody needs to leave town, if you can't find a kennel, you're not happy. And if you can leave town, you're happy as a dog with 2 tails. So there you go. I think we should support this.
Any other discussion? If not, we have an amendment to this ordinance on the floor. Everybody has a copy of it, so we have a motion second on the floor. We'll vote on the amendment. And the amendment passes, all yeses. So now we'll go back to the original. Ordinance, which we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion on that? Supervisor Coulter.
Yeah, John, maybe you could help me with this, but we have an automatic issue. In other words, the county has a certain amount of time to accept or deny a completed permit application for septic systems and pornographers. Do we have any other, that's what my understanding is. Do we have any other permits that we have that kind of assurance of service? It's 30 days for pornographers. I don't know what it is for septic systems.
Well, for the adult use establishments, because our zoning code has to be sensitive to the adult uses and the free speech rights that go with that, and based on past court decisions, it's imperative that counties be very clear and be of the opinion that time is of the essence. So the way the code was set up based on our consulting attorney along with corporation counsel, that while a conditional use permit is going on, it states that if the county cannot act on a conditional use permit within 30 days, that a provisional permit would be issued to the adult use establishment at their own risk as the conditional use permit continues through the process. So the provisional permit is just that. It's not a guarantee. It allows the adult use to establish themselves if they so choose as they go through the conditional use permit process. In terms of the septic tank, I'm not sure, Brett or Ellen, if you can answer that. I'm not sure about the 30-day. I'm not aware of that. This is Kevin Grayball, Land Zoning Administrator.
Yeah, I believe it's 30 days from the time of a complete application received for sanitary permits.
And again, that's a completed application. We need to have the house plans match the septic design. We need to make sure that there is a maintenance agreement that's been executed with the property owner for that. And in about 1/3 of the cases in St. Croix County, state approval has to be issued for systems such as mound systems and things of that nature. So sometimes there's a delay in that. But when all that is fulfilled and we have a completed application, from what I'm hearing Kevin say, we do have 30 days to issue that.
Thank you. Supervisor Coulter?
Yeah, I'd like to move that this zoning revision be sent back to the committee to be reviewed, and all the permit applications, all the permits the county's issues be reviewed for some kind of assurance of service like septic systems and pornographers receive.
Everybody hear what the motion was? Do I have a second to that? Supervisor Miller seconds it. Is there any discussion on that? Supervisor Acura.
We had a problem when it came up that if there was a complaint, that it wasn't being done in a timely manner. There's no time limit for a complaint because we go through a process and it depends how long it takes, and then we go further, and then it can move to the courts where it can start all over again. All other areas where there were time limits, if I remember correctly, we had a report to community development where every time limit was met. So anything that has a specified time limit in it, the community development department is doing their job and is meeting the legal requirement. So I think this zoning change should go through as is.
Supervisor Coulter.
Yeah, right now that permit service only applies to pornographers and septic systems, I think. And so all I'm suggesting is, and I'm sure that there might be more reasonable periods of time for considering different types of permits. I think it needs some review to come up with something reasonable. But I think that because I've received personally some volume of complaints about how long it takes to get a permit, I think that we need to assure our residential customers, constituents, and businesses and developers an assurance of service that we right now only provide to pornographers and septic systems.
Ellen?
I just wanted to clarify with Kevin's assistance that we do have time limits, and Judy was referring to those. Land use permits have a time limit. We have to process them. Once we have a properly completed application, we have a time limit in which that permit must be processed. Conditional use permits that go before the Board of Adjustment have a time frame in which they all must be processed. Just about everything we have has a time frame that has to be processed in, and those time frames have been established. In fact, I would ask Corporation Counsel to weigh in a little bit, but we have more. He has sometimes commented to us that we have time limits when other county. This is not a state requirement, it's a county requirement. So, Kevin, if you wanted to add any. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Hanson.
In addition to having time limits, what Ellen didn't say is that they've already purchased software to track all of the permitting which is being done by community development. The software is being selected, refined, and implemented. It's going to track and give applicants the ability to go online, look at what the status is of their permitting. It'll be rolled out over the next 18 to 24 months. They're going to take it very slowly and make sure that it's done right, and it's not being announced officially because we don't want anybody knocking on the door saying, hey, I want to check online what my application status is, because they're going to do it very carefully. It's going to, the reason that this is being done largely is because people want to know what the status of their application is. So I encourage you, please vote against this amendment because it will cause way more problems than it would ever begin to solve. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Coulter?
Yeah, this is the fourth time I brought this question up, and we've never had a hearing about it. It's been rejected from the agenda. No bailiff's ever been called, but it's been rejected from the agenda, and so we've never had a fair hearing about this subject at our committee level. And that's all I'm suggesting, is that I'd like to know what all the time limits are for these various permits and hear a justification for them and review them. And I think the committee should do that. That's why I made this motion.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor. Supervisor Malik.
I'd reminded the board that Supervisor Schoberg and I proposed a change to the budget to add one to the staff of the department. We were motivated in part by the need to adequately staff the department to provide timely service. And so if our plans work right, any defects in service should be remedied as the new person comes online.
Okay. Any other discussion? Otherwise, we have a motion on the floor and a second to send it back to committee. So that takes a yes vote to send it back and a no vote to deny it. So that motion's on the floor, send it to committee, so we'll vote it this time. Oh,
Yeah,
Supervisor
I
Foster.
actually have a question and maybe comment and so forth. So, first of all, Mr. Coulter, would you clarify, is this intended to just put back to the committee the standards in regard to, the timing? Or is the entire zoning thing going back to committee? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm just proposing, for the purposes of what kind of service we assure people on their permits, when a completed permit will be accepted or denied, that we review all of those.
So, in other words, what we really need is we need, the standards, being made as a matter of public record. And so everybody knows what they are and understands them. And I think that, that should be duly noted as something that should be done,
Okay. We have a motion on the floor and a second. I think we'll just, Supervisor Hanson, you have quick?
There are standards. The standards exist, and I'm sorry, Tom, but I don't believe you ever actually asked what are the standards. That's an easy question to answer. I believe what I heard you ask was, can we eliminate the standards? The standards are, whenever somebody takes out a permit, it's explained very thoroughly what the time frame will be for this permit, and the rules are quite plain. So, and we can provide that to everybody if you'd like. This may not be the moment, but it's very, very clear and very set by our statute.
We have a motion and a second on the floor to send it back to committee. We're going to vote it this time. And that fails. So now we'll go back to the original motion on the floor on the ordinance. We have a motion and a second, and with no more discussion, we'll vote it this time. Supervisor Foster.
I just have a question in regard to, the rezoning. I don't know if we had any comments on it in terms of the ag districts and so forth, and the large animal farms or whatever. Is that affecting anything that's currently in existence, or is that, can you kind of go into that a little bit?
I'm just going to scroll down to the zoning map. So the areas you see in green and blue on the overhead are areas that are zoned Ag 1 or Ag 2. The Ag 1 is in the green, and the Ag 2 is the blue. Within those districts, you're allowed to go over 500 animal units with a conditional use permit. Where it is going to begin to limit the livestock facilities are the areas you see in yellow, more on the west end of the county. That's the proposed R2 district. And within that district, major subdivisions are allowed. You can do your residential lot divisions up to 2-acre lots. But we're capping the size of the animal units on a property to 200. Again, we're beginning to separate that larger catch-all rural residential district. As you get further east into the county, Emerald, Glenwood, Springfield, Katy, the cream-colored, that's the R1. They will continue to not have any restrictions compared to the current code now. So they can have up to 499 animal units as a permitted use and above that amount with a conditional use. So that's not changing. Correct, and we've had up to 4 meetings with our towns. The last one being earlier this year, we had individual meetings with the 17 towns and county zoning. We made sure explicitly to explain the ramifications of the R1 versus the R2. In terms of the blue and the green districts, the ag districts, as part of this process, we did not change any of the standards in those districts. They went through their own revision process and creation back in 2014, so they're fairly recent.
Sorry, I think to answer your question, I think that we've gone through the trouble of making sure that there aren't any current larger facilities that are getting zoned R2. So we're not rendering non-conforming any of the larger livestock farms.
Okay.
Correct.
Supervisor Foster.
One more question.
Yep.
In regard to the solar and wind facilities, it looks like, let's put this on, it looks like to me, like the way the statute is or our zoning is written, that we follow the state so that if the state does change, then we would automatically follow the state in terms of, because right now we have some restrictions in terms of what can be done. But if it changed on a state level, then we would automatically flow into whatever the state allowed if they basically allowed, for some restrictions on solar and wind energy facilities. Yeah.
Our code specifically references the administrative rules that regulate that. So actually, if you read the administrative rules for solar energy and wind turbines, they have specific standards already laid out. Whereas if we put them in our zoning code, we'd just be duplicating what the standards are. So that's why we have a very short section. They tie back to the administrative rules.
Thank you. If there's no other questions or discussion, we're going to vote on our original motion, second on the ordinance. You ready to vote, Cindy? Okay.
This is the original plus my amendment,
Original.
right? With the amendment, okay.
The original amended.
Oh, I didn't hear it, sorry.
Yeah. So, we get it up on the screen to vote? Now we'll vote. Two noes, the rest yeses, so that passes. Thank you, everyone. And request for future agenda items. Supervisor Fiedler.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to suggest 2 things. One, to pick up on what Supervisor Malik said earlier with regard to alternatives to jail confinement only. I would suggest that we have a briefing information session on that at an appropriate time in the very near future. And I'm going to suggest, since the CJCC meets in January, that we might, if it fits into the rest of the agenda for your consideration, that we do that in February, 90 days from now, and we have a comprehensive briefing on alternatives that are now going on and that should be considered relative to our inmate population. Not necessarily. If we think it's committee of the whole, that'd be fine with me, but I think we can have a discussion within our normal rules. And the second thing I'd like to suggest is that earlier we voted down Supervisor Fosterling's amendment for a very modest decrease in the tax levy. And I would suggest that we're all sensitive to what our constituents want to pay in taxes. We walk out there today, not one of them is going to say, give me more taxes, okay? I think we should also add to our agenda at an appropriate time, again in the near future, maybe February or March of next year, a briefing from the administrator on alternatives to increase in the tax levy. For example, we have a huge reserve, basically, far larger than is recommended nationally for counties to have in reserve. We could do all sorts of things to cut the tax imposition on our constituents, and I think we should seriously consider it, and that should be a major topic of discussion. And I want to add to that I think the administrator and Ken Witt did a fabulous job on the budget this year and should be highly commended. But we also must be very sensitive to the tax levies that are going up, 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 and I think we can find other ways other than the tax levy, so I urge that to be a future item of consideration.
Anything, Supervisor Malik?
I won't speak for Supervisor Modadan, but I think I would put the topic of mental health services in the jail as an item that, as the proper frame of reference for our concern.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Supervisor Fosterling?
Yeah, I just want to comment too, in terms of just, controlling costs. Supervisor Hanson has made the point that, we have an administrator who's done a great job, for us in terms of the budget. We had a discussion in which there were two positions, that were pushed to be put on there without really voting on it. And I just want to comment, one of them, was in the call center, 911 call center. And as I pointed out before, we have hundreds of calls that come in for just burning permits that are fielded by those same people. And so, before we jump in and say we need another person, we should be looking at things like, does this make sense from a standpoint of, could we put software in there where we wouldn't have the transfer of people and that sort of thing? I think that would be on the agenda. It would be a good issue in terms of what discretion, does the administrator have on these budgetary things. I know that in CDC, there's a certain level of vacancy right now in terms of positions. And, does adding a position theoretically, does it really make a difference in terms of, it adds a theoretical cost, but the point is that, if you have vacancies there, you're not running, the salaries. And so I just defer, I guess, to the administrator in terms of what comments were already made, the original budget as proposed. And I know it's very difficult, to say, in that kind of discussion, it's very easy to just say, well, let's just add one on. So I don't know, if that's an agenda item, for the future, in terms of, do a motion as far as what kind of discretion, the administrator has on that, but I just think that's an important topic.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, just to maybe a closing comment on the budget. A lot of thought goes into it, a lot of months of work, and the decisions or recommendations that I make to the board are well thought out, but I'm always open for additional input and ideas and thoughts from the County Board of Supervisors, because at the end of the day, it's your budget now, and you own it. And I'm just a staff person. All I can do is give you my best input, my best professional advice, but that's all it is. And at the end of the day, you adopt the budget. It becomes the county board's budget at this point. I want to thank each and every one of you that have contacted me over the last couple months with budget questions, either myself or Ken Witt. I hope that we've been able to try to be responsive to you to help you get to the point where you are today. I take the feedback that I've gotten from the board today to heart, and every year, this is, I think, my 29th county budget that I've presented over the course of my career. I've learned every single year how to try to do it better. And so I've learned some things this year. I want to thank also all the department heads and staff that are sitting in the back. Those of you that are still here, some of them have left to go back to their day jobs. I want to thank all of them, because without their input and support, I would not be able to present a budget to you. So thank you to the department heads that are here and staff, Ken Witt and Scott Cox, our legal counsel, helps me every single day. I want to thank him personally. And with that, Ken has the updated budget books. So you can turn in the book that you brought, and the book that you take with you will have all the changes that have been made to the budget. So thank you.
Yeah. That's it. Okay. As far as agenda items, well, anything you have, you can turn it into Cindy, myself, or Pat. And then Cindy, do you have a report? Your county clerk's report?
I just have a quick, can you hear me? Why can't I hear? He's working. Just a quick announcement on elections, if I could. Just a quick announcement with respect to elections. So the notice of the spring election will be published this month. Papers for county supervisor position may be circulated the 1st of December. They're due on January 7th. Non-candidacy forms, if you're not going to run, appreciate you file one by December 27th. I do have packets in my office. I will also be putting links on the website if you're interested in obtaining a packet sooner than later. And that's it.
Okay. Thank you. And before I adjourn, I talked to our Pat about December, and we don't have anything really pressing for December, nothing on the agenda. So we're going to leave it open for now, but we might just cancel the December meeting if there's nothing coming up that's business items. So just so you know that. Thank you, everyone, and we are adjourned.